Howdy. Welcome to my cellar one more time. Hope it was worth the trip, or I hope it will be worth the trip. A friend says that the AD&D Psionic Discipline ESP requires a saving throw. I showed him that it doesn't. Neither does the magic user spell. He says it's not balanced. He then said that since it's identical to the magic user ESP spell, that it has verbal components. I said it does not, since it's a product of the brain as detailed in the psionic section of the AD&D Player's Handbook. What do you say to this? Rules are as written or intended back then? Rules as written. I created the first psionic system. If he doesn't like the way it plays, tough. Thinks it's unbalanced, tough. It's what it is. That's the way it works in your world. It's what it is. I think that paying property tax year and 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 out is unfair. So what I think? So what he thinks? The rules were written for that reason. They are what they are. There's any number of reasons behind them, why they were written that way. It all kind of fit into Gary's overarching hierarchy. Rules as written, yes. In psionics, yes. Psionics is one of those things, if you tinker with it, guys with big foreheads will be taking over the world before you know it. All right. This individual sent in a bunch of stuff, some of which I tended to disregard. What were your major inspirations for the games, scenarios, or modules and magazines that you have produced or helped to produce? Okay, I'm going to go with magazine, and I'm going to go with Dragon. Before I was officially hired by TSR, Gary and I had the discussion concerning what he wanted this little strategic review to become. Strategic review was pretty much a house organ, and it was mostly about D&D and miniatures, but some other stuff too. It was what interested Gary, and it was a place to put in ideas for new stuff in D&D, different characters and character classes and what. And we just realized that we shared the common desire, produce a magazine that would produce the phenomenon known as rising tide lifting all boats. We wanted to make a magazine that did that. We didn't want to focus on our stuff. We didn't want to pan other people. I didn't want to pan other people's products. I never printed a negative review. I never printed photographs of badly made figures. I had an ego that felt that if I liked it, you'd probably be interested in it too. So, hey, cool, here's this article about this neat game. Or a different way to think about a game. Or something of that nature. And it worked. If you ask most of the people that have been in the industry for a while and know the history, they'll tell you that Dragon's magazine built the industry by lifting all the boats. We started the whole thing. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to see the hobby that we love become bigger and grander and turn people on to it. Hey, look at these neat things we do. Think you'd like to do them with us? And for the most part, it worked. How do you want people to use the article scenarios and gaming ideas that you've been able to put out into the world? I want them to think of them as ideas. Now, within the concept of gaming, there's no such thing as stealing. We borrow. Somebody's got an interesting idea in a book by L. Sprague de Camp, and you look at it and you go, yeah, I kind of like that. And so you borrow it, and it becomes part of yours. That's what you should. The stories and scenarios in that. If you don't want to play the scenario as is, fine. The thing that gave me the greatest pleasure when I was doing Dragon Magazine was the thought that every issue I was reaching out into thousands of heads and massaging their gray matter just a little bit. Just a little bit. Not in any particular fashion. Not hypnotizing people and making them into automatons. Just reaching out there and massaging those brains. Getting people to think. If they like something that we published in the magazine and just adopted it verbatim, fine. If they liked it enough to, I want to... Either way, as publishers of the magazine, I went out because I made them think. I made you think. And that's really, truly what drove me, what gave me giddy little giggles late at night, is I was reaching out and making people think. They didn't have to agree with me, because by deciding they disagreed, they had thought through enough to come to that conclusion. Well, it's okay. I made them think. Let's see. That one. All right. How do I feel about the influence that modern genre fiction, in all its forms, has in the modern games of tabletop role-playing? Well, it's good if it's being read and being used and being absorbed and transmogrified and into the current games. That's good. That's great. If the fiction is popular, it means that the people reading it like it. If a lot of people read it and like it, then there's more potential for a game to, or to have a game application. Not whether it's a game itself or whatever, but create, like the Vancy and Ione Stones. All right, when they came out with D&D, all of a sudden there was lots of similar type artifacts, which is cool. I'm not saying it isn't. But in seeing those, people had to go, no, I think this is a better way to do it. And so they thought. And that's what we were doing, stimulating thinking. That was my superpower. Your outro song says you thought you brought Psionics into the game. It's true. I'd love to hear the story behind that and the inspiration. What are your thoughts? All right. The story behind that and the inspiration was, I said to Gary, this brain mole and there were a couple of iconic monsters way back in the day that were just enough to make you pucker. Just the mere thought, suggestion. The Beholder was one, the other one was a Mind Flayer. There was no defense against a Mind Flayer except try to kill it before it literally sucked your smarts out of your head. I didn't think that was fair. I believe fair is there should always be a counterbalance. Okay? You couldn't give a race of monsters or a group of monsters an ability that could not be stopped. Because a savvy, sadistic, twisted DM is going to have a rift open and 27 Mind Flayers are going to come through and they're going to start enslaving the countryside. And they're unstoppable. So he said, okay, what do you got thinking about? And I said, well, You like Doctor Strange. I like Doctor Strange. Let's look at powers of the mind. Okay, good idea. What more? I said, well, it should be extremely rare. Exceedingly rare. There should just be a at character creation, there should be a tiny possibility that maybe you have a knack for it, but you still got to train it, and that's the way it started. And of course, it didn't stay that way very long. Pretty soon, everybody and their brother had psionic abilities, and they weren't playing it right, and they didn't understand it. And yeah, it was an imperfect system, but it worked. And that's how it came about. It was a reaction to an unstoppable creature or type of creature. Brain moles, thought eaters, mind flares, all those things that mess with your head and your intelligence, could enthrall you. Or, gee, I got off easy. I only lost 2 points of intelligence. Well, if you were hovering there at 10 to begin with, now all of a sudden you're a little slow. So that's why it came out. It was a counterbalance. What are my thoughts on the psionic player class from 2nd edition? I don't like any player class beyond the original concepts. Fighter, cleric, magic user. There are all the rest. There are some, okay, druids are okay, rangers are okay. All right, mainly because they're such popular tropes, and they're actually variations on one of the 3 main ones. I didn't like it when later editions made your species your class. So I didn't think much of it. I thought it was the best psychic character class than any edition that came after. Okay, and I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm saying that I think the bar's rather low on that. But that's just an author spouting about something he did many, many, many years ago. In regard to saber-toothed tigers, this is a modern play style thing with so many being some sort of furry PC and having another familiar who is an extra set of meat hit points. Okay, we used to call the big dumb fighters up in the front meat shields, but the point, the image and the yes, it's the same. To protect the PC and often 3 attacks itself. I agree that the animal should often fail to follow the commands or go beast mode on whatever at random. Alternatively, perhaps if it was too tame enough to walk around through town or wait when a character tells us to stand by outside, I'd probably make it too tame to actually help very much. Yeah, there's another reference later about familiars. Familiars should be very, very rare and big scary animals that would normally look at you as below them on the food chain. That should be exceedingly risky. And oh yeah, some wimpy person in your campaign's gonna, oh, but I rescued him as a cub, and now we're bonded and we sleep together, and you know it's true because you saw it on YouTube, or nah. I prefer to think that the beast lurks ever just underneath the skin and could come out at any time. I know a lot of the people that are doing that grew up on He-Man and him riding around on a giant big tiger cat that could kick everybody but Skeletor's butt out by itself. Well, I don't care. That was He-Man, and I never did care much for the. Though my son was an avid fan, I never cared much for it. And being too tame, well, yeah. It's a tightrope playing with familiars, big familiars. Now, having a weasel or a rat or an owl or something like that, no problem. Chances are they're not going to figure much in any conversations in that until somebody goes, oh yeah, but I trained my owl to pick up ashes and throw. Yeah, okay. That's up to you as DM whether or not you allow that kind of foolishness. Just saying. Should any spell auto-succeed, or should spells always require a roll with some, perhaps remote chances of failure? I've been thinking about this in terms of clerical healing spells specifically. Things like character alignment affecting the success of a healing spell. Perhaps the deity be more inclined to assist a PC with the same alignment. Well, that's partly why I did away with the whole aspect of healing as originally published. Number one, when I got there in 1975, I was a lapsed Catholic and still a little hinky about the idea of positing that clerics in this game were conjuring and doing spells and burning chicken feathers and stuff, just like a magic user was. I always thought that it was the clerics that luckily didn't get the scrutiny and the attention from the public that were trying to pick apart the game and show all its flaws. If the clerics had gotten the attention, they'd have been living, screaming, and waving pitchforks outside the office in Lake Geneva. Because priests and ministers and parsons don't do spells. And that's okay. And that's why now I use them differently. All right? That's why I deal in healing potions that are really just Red Bulls, because it fits my concept of how hit points work. Not meat and blood, but endurance, breath, agility, nimbleness, as you get tired and beat down until you finally don't avoid a fatal blow. So, my healing spells always work. Still got to roll to see how well they work. What's the expiry date on the bottle? So I get around that. They all work equally on everybody. I just ducked it. Didn't seem to be that big a deal in my cosmos. Yes, you can certainly factor in alignment if you're doing a more standard healing type thing. Certainly, you would be less inclined to heal someone of a different alignment. In the terms of strict D&D, you'd be much less inclined to burn a spell slot, unless the game you've got set up by doing a selfless noble thing like that's going to get you a buttload of experience points. Alright, you got to dance around that as it affects your own belief system with what you're comfortable with. I've been kind of weary about my players trying to get wild animals as pets ever since my second campaign, where one player decided to start collecting animals like Snow White was dropped to the world of Pokemon. Those things fought with each other and ran away quickly. It got ridiculous. In my current game, one player decided to feed a giant weasel instead of fighting it, and quickly convinced it that sticking around would get it frequent large meals. I'm curious to see how this goes. Yeah, okay. It sounds like an interesting project. The thing chased the rabbit into the brush once already, and the player spent 2 hours after it. After a lucky roll, she got it back. A leather harness was made for it to prevent that from happening again. But I'll have to roll and see how it feels about the harness. The group understands it's not trained, and if it chooses to participate in combat, they will not be able to control it. But it hasn't come to that yet. Well, heck, last time I looked, this game was about having fun. And if you're having a good time going through all this over a giant weasel that somebody's trying to buy off or domesticate, swell. No problem there. Fun, fun, fun. If you aren't having it, you shouldn't be doing it. I'm in agreement with the focus on abilities stifling creativities. Players who spend a lot of time building a character tend to want to use those feats, skills, powers, etc. instead of trying anything or problem solving. For new school D&D, one solution I'm considering is to make most PC skills usable only during downtime activities. For example, a PC with the history skill roll could roll to solve a riddle during downtime, but can't do it during the session. Sorry, you got to use your brains to figure this out. Work with other PCs. The same goes if a ranger wants to train Gentle Ben. No, you can't train the bear with a single roll. Tell me what your character is doing to make the bear like you. Thoughts? I think that's a great idea. Don't just roll the dice. In this case anyway, as DM, you would have to come up, tell me what you're doing, what techniques you've been using, an honest assessment of your success so far, and then I'm going to assign a percentage, and we're going to roll the dice and go from there. Not just a flat-out die roll. Oh, my skill says if I roll 7 or higher, I can do it. Nope. Speaking of Gentle Ben, for a good laugh, look up the Simpsons episodes where Gentle Ben is a talk show host. I didn't know they had Gentle Ben talking. But hell, it's the Simpsons. I had some good results. Priming minis by brushing on Pro Acryl Dark Neutral Gray Airbrush Primer. And when he says brushing, he means brushing with a brush. In the winter, we don't always get good days for doing the rattle can thing. Dark gray or black base, followed by a light to medium white dry brush. I guess it's called slap chop or zenithal now. Well, I have a Pache V, and I've got all the parts. In fact, I have extra parts. I have more than one needle because the needles came in different sizes for the spray and all that. And I acquired a diagrammed, like an owner's manual with exploded diagrams. So now it's just figure out how to assemble it, go out and get my old compressor and see that this diaphragm hasn't rotted out after all these years. And then I'm going to spray because I want the lightest, thinnest coat possible that adheres. If I could, I'd prime on a molecular level, because then you can put all the detail in with the fine painting. So I'm going to give it a shot, but thanks for the tip. In terms of the weakness of the boss monster, something I've always wanted to do is run a campaign where the player's hometown is taken over by some evil creature or NPC. The whole story arc would be the players trying to gather information about their nemesis and acquire equipment needed to challenge the bad guy and free their town. Maybe someday. I did something like that once at a convention when with the people who signed up to play in this one game, every one of them had played in one of the others that I brought with, so there was nothing I could run again. So I'm on the fly. I made up an adventure. And I had a map of my enormous giant town. And a lot of them, broke up into groups, because I had, 8, 10 players. And so they broke up into groups, and these went and looked over here, and these went there, and this went to this section of town and that. And you could do something like that. Lay low, find a tavern where you don't, this is all the drama that you as the DM can have if you choose or not. But, yeah, one of the greatest failings of modern players that have only played in the modern editions is that they fail to gather information. Whereas this scenario, this idea will require extensive information gathering. Going back to skills and abilities, everybody just waits for something to kick in for them automatically instead of gathering information on their own. Did I miss a page? Oh, I got a blank page. No wonder it looked bigger. It says, that's a viable idea. It's a viable idea. And by being enough familiar and having strange mixed in with the familiar, you can get a good tension going there. The idea of powerful monsters being weakened at the start of the battle is a good one, and I'm stealing it. No, but you're welcome to borrow it. I know many, many DMs, particularly when they were new to the game, saw that if the monster's stats at what are their hit points, 2d4, they gave them 8 points right off the bat. And it wasn't horrendous to do that because I don't recall, especially in the earlier editions, it's saying that you got to roll 2d4 on each one of them to determine. But if you've got 5 orcs and their hit points are 2d4, you're going to get an average of 5 hit points per orc. There'll be a couple that'll be max, and there'll be a couple that'll be real puny. Depends on how many chances you have and the range of scale and yada, 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 and all that math stuff. All right. Now I'm going no cues. A couple of weeks ago, I went on a friend, my partner's blog of many things, and we talked about world building. Today, I today being Thursday, I did a remote class at a college in Maine for a good dear friend who teaches it, game theory and game design. And it got me to thinking that if you're going to branch out, you're going to build a world, you're going to create more than just a few interesting dungeons on a somewhat amorphous body of water or body of land. They could be pirates. In fact, I've often wanted to do an adventure where the pirates infested a certain sea, and they were all dwarves, and they sailed in double-hulled catamarans and had tension or steam driven weapons that were quite lethal. But anyway, building a world, where do you start? Okay, you start with the globe, the actual mass of what makes up a world, and yada, yada, yada. But here's something, and if there's interest in this, I'd be glad to go through some of the many. There's several things you have to think about when you're building a world. But here's one that you should keep in mind anytime you're designing adventures for your group. How much does it cost to go into whatever civilized area, the village, town, city, whatever? How much does it cost for a nourishing bowl of stew that's not likely to kill you, and a drink of something that's not going to kill you. Okay, a day's sustenance. Figuring you're sleeping rough out in the woods, whatever, okay. But it's just an interesting place to look at. What does that cost? And from that point forward, you build your economy. So let's say that you decide that that nourishing meal is going to cost 25 coppers or 2.5 silver. Now you've already had to set up, I should have said this first, what's going to equal what? 100 coppers to a silver, 50 coppers to a silver, how many silvers to a gold? The point I'm making at, when you're figuring out your economy before you begin, you need this base to work upon. Because from that base, you'll decide what's a reasonable treasure based on the economy. An economy where that nutritious meal and mediocre ale costs 15 coppers. Well, finding a haul of 42,000 copper pennies somewhere, now you can see, okay, divide that, whoa, okay. And copper, being a small denomination, is not going to flood the economy wherever you go back to spend your loot. You have to keep in the ugly realities, especially as the DM that wants to part their players from their loot. You have to keep in to account the economy, taxation, inflation. You will ruin the economy if you come in with a huge influx of specie, particularly. All right. Now, when there's other things then that the economy leads to thinking about, all based on what size of habitational gatherings, city, town, village, hamlet. So I always thought a starting point for a good basic economy was somewhere around 1870 in the United States West. For 20 cents, you could go in the saloon, get a beer, and stack as much stuff between two pieces of bread, call it a sandwich. 20 cents, 30 cents, something like that. A shot's 15 cents. 50 cents. Whatever, you gotta set those things. Your economy is the basis for everything else. How much is too much treasure to give away? How much is too little? How much is peanuts, not worth the effort to haul it out, and how much is? This goes hand in glove with the size of your settlement. Little villages are not going to have somebody who can convert specie into gems and jewelry. Everybody knows that gems and jewelry are easy to transport and hold about your person and worth a lot more ounce for ounce than metal coins are. There's a whole lot of things you got to think about when you decide to build a world. And some of them, even if you're just trying to write your first couple of linked adventures, still have a lot of relevance to what you have to do, because if you have a solid basis, you'll find it easier to navigate along the way to your goal. But you got to establish that solid basis. You know, D&D tried to do it. In the very first books, there were lists of what a shield cost, what a sword cost, right? And starting out as a level nothing, you were lucky if you had enough coppers to buy a pitchfork. And when you made that first score, everybody ran around looking for what they could find. But if you weren't in a metropolis of any size, all the money in the world didn't do you any good if you couldn't spend it. So that's a little thing you need to think about while you're thinking about all the other things that are going to constitute your world. But think of the economy, and your economy will scale the loot. Okay, we can go back to that 1870s American West. If you give them the opportunity to find an enormous haul, word will get out, and more bandits will come to take it away. Now, you can take it that way if you like, and you can let them spend the next 3 sessions fighting off people who want to steal it. But I think you can probably find better things to do in those 3 sessions. And on that note, I will bid you da-da-da-govee. Hello, and welcome to my cellar.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Last man around when them rates went down. Called it Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine. He's a curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought Psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. DSR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree, high as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.